Thank you, Mike. Thank you for the opportunity of presenting SPHR Medical. Some familiar faces in the room. Happy to see you again. For those of you who don't know about us, we are a commercial stage innovative point of care monitoring and diagnostic device company, and we are listed on AIM. Our lead product is called Proxima, and it displaces the current desktop blood gas analyzers with a patient-dedicated miniaturized blood gas analyzer. The market we are in is big and is growing very quickly. It's a $1.4 billion market worldwide, growing at about 10% per annum. And our current product, called Proxima 4, is market ready. We were very proud to launch it in December last year. We launched it here in Europe. And our target for this year is to sign up 15 to 20 repeat customers for this year to start generating revenue off that product that we just recently launched. And to date, we have had more than 20 hospitals who have requested to get the product evaluated. And we've already also achieved our first sale within the first 2 months of launch, which we think is a great sign of, let's say, the market taking to this product. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the market that we are in terms of what blood gas measurement actually means, in terms of the current practice, you need frequent blood sampling to basically manage your critically ill patients. You want to get an idea of how well the patient is doing, how well the lungs are doing, what metabolic issues, how the organs are functioning. So people typically take what you call blood gas measurements. Now, they're not only blood gas measurements, they're also things you measure, things like your glucose or lactate in the blood. You might have heard about glucose control. There's a lot of issues around new products being launched for that. But this is typically a measurement that you do very frequently in a critical care state. It could be intensive care station or an operating theater. Now, the current solutions have considerable barriers to measure very frequently. They work well if you do a few measurements, like 2 or 3 a day. But if you have to do a measurement every hour or even every 30 minutes, depending if the patient is very unstable, it really becomes a drain. Because essentially what you're doing is the nurse comes, she kits up, puts on an apron, a glove, sometimes even goggles, gets out a syringe and draws a syringe full of blood. She opens the arterial line. Now, people are scared of opening arterial line because it can introduce an infection into the arterial line. So that's actually bad news for the patient. Next, she takes that syringe and walks to the closest blood gas analyzer. Now, that can be very close by, just around the corner, or sometimes they even have to sort of leave the room and take an elevator 2 stories up. We've seen all that. So essentially, during that phase where patient is unstable, the nurse is not there to look after the patient. So that's not good news for the patient either. And in fact, you're using nurses' working time for something. She should look after the patient, not walk with a syringe to the next blood gas analyzer. And at the end of the day, the blood is discarded. This means actually every time you do a measurement, the patient loses blood. And if you're going to do that, let's say every hour, about 5 to 10 milliliters of blood, that patient becomes very anemic very quickly, so you have to transfuse blood. So there are reasons that if you only do 2 or 3 measurements a day, this practice is well settled, it works well. But if you really want to increase the number of tests per day because the patient is fundamentally unstable, this starts to bite you. And that's exactly where we are placing Proxima. You can see the device up there. There's the monitor, here's the device, connected to the patient. So it's right there. It's a disposable patient-attached device which we mount into the existing arterial line of a patient in an intensive care station. Now what the nurse does, she draws blood. The blood exits the body, but it stays in a closed system. And a closed system means it's not exposed to air. So this whole thing about opening arterial lines, infection risk is being dealt with. Now, once the measurement is then performed at the bedside, so the nurse doesn't have to leave the patient, and she actually doesn't walk around. So there's a faster turnaround in terms of the results, and more importantly also that less nurse working time is consumed for actually doing the measurement. So, and then we return all the blood back to the patient. Now this is a very, very important one in that by doing that, there's no associated blood loss, and therefore, let's say the patients tend to become less anemic over time. And we've done a load of sort of evaluations. We've connected over 180 patients to date since we started sort of marketing also the previous device. And there's some pretty impressive figures in terms of reduction of workload. So it could be sort of more than 30% reduction of just the pure nursing workload. Or, I mean, since the nurse doesn't move away, it's essentially she no longer spends any time away from the bedside when doing the measurement. Or again, no, we return all the blood, so it's 100% reduction in blood loss. So you can see that on all these metrics which prevent people from doing frequent measurements in an ICU, we are essentially having a solution which significantly reduces those issues and makes it easier to perform more frequent measurements. And once you have that data, it becomes easier to then also understand how your patient is doing and adapt your therapy and get a better outcome for your patient. Now, we also ran a study last year to demonstrate and actually really investigate, how does it actually stack up? I mean, the data you saw there earlier was us collecting that data when we did the patient evaluations. But we actually said, let's do an independent study. So we did that, went to the cardiac intensive care at Universal Hospital Southampton. We ran a randomized study on 20 patients, so 10 on Proxima, 10 on the conventional standard of care. And we did about 10 measurements within a 24-hour period. Now that gives you an idea that we did a measurement every 2 hours on average. Even here, it confirmed that we had, again, a 20% reduction in the total time per sample, more than 50% reduction in delay from when I actually want to do a measurement until I don't get distracted and I can actually start the measurement. And very interesting, for every measurement, and this was a well-equipped ICU where the blood gas analyzer essentially just walk out of the door. So you say, well, that's going to be quick, right? What's the advantage of doing the measurement here, not leaving the patient? I just take a syringe out of the door. Well, they actually spend on average 3 minutes away from that patient. And if you tally that up for the day one, half an hour of that day, the patient was not looked after. And these were very sick patients coming back from open heart surgery, where a lot of things can go wrong after that surgery. So that actually is not a good number, if you think about it, even though they just literally go out of the door. So there are a lot of sort of hidden costs that people are not aware of. And if you show them that data, it sort of becomes an eye-opener for them. So if we look at the market, I already talked about the size of the market being 1.4 billion and growing very quickly at 10% per annum. So it's projected to be about 3.5 billion by the 2023. Now, this growth is essentially driven by your aging population. More and more people sort of stay alive more longer. They have some issues being brought into the ICU, they have to do more and more tests. So this whole test volume is driven up by our aging population. Now, we've estimated that within that $3.5 billion market, the market we can address with Proxima is about $1 billion. So we will not be put on every patient out there, but we want to be put on the patient where it matters and grab a sizable part of the market. And since we are the only patient-attached blood gas analyzer, we can expect to get a decent sort of market share. And therefore, sort of once we have rolled out Proxima worldwide, we think we can achieve a sort of annual revenue of more than $200 million per annum. So that's the market that we operate in. So how do we go from where we are today to actually getting to that big number you see out there? Now, that can take a bit of time. And we've got a bit of a graph here to sort of try and explain to you how we're going to try and achieve this. On the one hand, first of all, we need to increase the number of people who are using it. And one of those things is actually geographical expansion. Which countries are we in? Add more countries, sign up more hospitals. But once you've actually signed up a hospital, you want to increase the usage of the number of patients that each hospital uses the device on. So that's the second aspect. So on the one hand, try and increase the number of customers you have, go into more countries, but at the same time, those customers you also have, you want to actually increase their usage over time. And thirdly, there's also some remaining product evolution ideas that we have so we can actually grab larger portions of that market as we go forward. So coming back to how do we want to grow the customer base? As I said, we launched Proxima 4 in December. We've essentially been on the road now for 2-3 months. Very encouraging early market reaction. We've achieved our first sales. We've had over those 20 hospitals who have requested evaluations. We've already finished in more than 4 hospitals that process, and we've moved on to the commercial discussions. And I think what's also important, we've had our first pediatric patients monitored with this device. The previous generation was not approved for pediatric use, so that's why we could never go to the children. And blood conservation is actually a very big thing for children. It's even a bigger thing than for adults. We are directly marketing the device in the UK, Germany, Netherlands, and Benelux. We have a handful of salespeople out there. We plan to sort of moderately grow the number of people we have within that area, not massive growth, but let's say so that we have enough resources so we can get to as many hospitals as we can. So our main, let's say, geographic expansion will come through distributors. Those who know us will have followed that we've signed up a Italian company back in July. So even before we launched the product, the first distributor signed up. They have now received their first order. They're fully trained and they started marketing the product. A second company is called Prohinsa in Spain, which has placed their initial order, and we will get them up and running in April. So that's just around the corner. And our target is to get to about 60% of the patient population in Europe by the end of this year. And we're currently also talking to sort of other distributors, other territories, so that we are sort of confident of signing up more distributors during the course of this year. So this is our initiative on getting to more customers. So if I look at a customer, how do I actually get more revenue and grow the usage? Now, we have looked at how Proxima could be used in each of those hospitals, and we've come up with three usage categories, being a low, medium, high. Now, a low category could get you an annual revenue around £15,000. That means you get about 75 patients connected to the device over a year, which is roughly just over one patient a week. And for that, you're going to need to have sort of 2 monitors placed. In the medium category, it'll be going up to 225 patients, about 45,000. That's roughly 4 patients a week. And then the high category would be 90,000. That's roughly 8 patients a week. So you can see, we expect when we sign up customers that most of them will start up in the low category. Obviously, they're interested in the device. They want to start using it, get comfortable with it. But over time, we actually want to grow them into sort of a medium or high category. Now, not all hospitals are big enough to get to a high category. Those would typically be your university hospitals, teaching hospitals. But again, you have significant numbers out there in each of those countries you can try and target. So for this year, we want to sign up 15 to 20. And I just want to put in relation that already over 20 hospitals have actually requested evaluations. Now, there's no guarantee that each of them will actually then buy the product, but I think it's a great start compared to that. We've been on the road for just over 2 months to really see this early traction in the market. Through our distributors, we think we're going to look to signing up 10 to 15 repeat customers. The distributors are sort of coming online as we speak, or will be coming online later in the year. So we think we, with our own sales force, can get a bigger number this year and a smaller number of distributors, but I think that will turn around because they have more salespeople going forward. So that in the coming years, we think they will definitely get more customers on board than we can. And that's also the main reason why we, instead of adding more of our own salespeople, we want to add more distributors going forward. The third aspect was product evolution. Now with Proxima 3, that was the device that I talked about previously when being here. We had that in the market for about 2 years. The total addressable market here in Europe, we were estimating to be around $40 million. We had 8 parameters on there. It was only approved for adults. And we sort of saw that, on average, maybe 1 out of 10 patients in an ICU were relevant for Proxima 3. Now, with the version we've just launched, Proxima 4, that market actually goes beyond $160 million. We've got 13 parameters. And the big one we've added this time around is glucose. On top of the glucose, we've also added, the children. So we can now add it to sort of get the device used on children. So with that, we think we can get to sort of 4 out of 10 patients in an ICU. I already talked about that we have some ideas to continue the product evolution. I think the big one is lactate. We are working on that. If we can bring that to market, we estimate the market to again go to 240 million. And the reason why that's the case, there's been a lot in the press actually recently about the silent killer in an ICU people don't know about. It's something called sepsis. Now, lactate is something that you need to measure very frequently if you have a septic patient who's about to have a septic shock. And if you're in a septic shock and you don't cover that one, you're actually going to die. So that is the next one. So while we are working on commercializing Proxima 4, it's a nice target. We can try and grow revenues over the coming years. We're also working at the same time to work on lactate and bring that to the market so we can then even grab a bigger part of that market going forward. So those are our 3 sort of activities to grow our revenue from, granted, a very small number today to get to a significant nice number over the next few years. But that's our near-term strategy. What's our long-term strategy? Currently, Proxima addresses a part of the healthcare continuum, being the critical care area. And I've just shown some UK numbers on this slide here. You have about 240,000 episodes of critical care. It's not the patients, because one patient couldn't come back for more than one episode of care. But it gives you time. So how often are people treated in an ICU? So that's about 240,000. Now, compare that to roughly 16 million admissions to a hospital, or 23 million visits to an A&E department, or even 340 million visits to a GP. Now, we know there's a need for monitoring a patient also outside of critical care in other parts of the hospital. Just an example, I was talking about sepsis. People are very scared. Somebody comes in, flu-like symptoms, into an A&E. They don't pick it up. They send them home with some, aspirin, whatever, and next morning they're dead because they missed the sepsis piece. So could you actually pick up that sepsis outside and make sure that you catch those people and then actually bring them into the ICU very quickly because they need that treatment? So we know there are monitoring needs out there, or some chronic diseases or well-being of elderly. Now, Proxima is based on a sensor technology, and you actually can see the size of the chip is smaller than my thumbnail. So what we see a potential, once Proxima is being rolled out, that we can actually create other kind of devices to monitor patients outside of the critical care area. So in the long term, our strategy is to also explore developing devices, let's say, for those other parts of the healthcare continuum, to also then sort of create additional revenue strands for the company going forward. Now, we recently announced our numbers for 2016. Our operating expenses were running at around 5 million per annum. We have, on average, a capitalized R&D expenditure of 2 million per annum. We had £30,000 revenue last year, and again, it's a nominal amount, but it's in line with expectations, because with our previous device, we were not really looking to generate a lot of revenue last year. We had cash of about 3.2 million as we turned the corner in the year, and we also put in place a loan facility of 3 million at the beginning of the year. We drew down 1.5 million, and we have another 1.5 million conditionally available to be drawn down until March 2018. And our scheduled loan repayments will start in April 2018, and will continue 2 years from then. So that gives you a snapshot on where we are today in terms of the numbers that we had just finished in 2016. So where are we and what are we sort of expecting to happen this year? With Proxima 4, we have a unique device with this patient-dedicated miniaturized blood gas analyzer. We have very strong endorsement by leading European clinicians who think this is a great piece of innovation. We have a global potential revenue for this device and this platform in its various forms or shapes of more than $200 million per annum. And we have a clear commercialization strategy underway. Now, we are currently exploring options to ensure that we have sufficient working capital for the commercialization phase of Proxima. And we are looking for sort of further, news flow catalysts of, let's say, further commercialization deals, could be additional distributors going forward this year. Also informing you about the initial further traction that we have achieved with Proxima 4. If we get any clinical data that sort of shows the benefit of using Proxima, obviously we'll also share that with the market. And given that we also are still embarking on a product evolution, any kind of development progress throughout this year, we would then also obviously share with you. And with that, I've come to the end, and we can start taking questions.
Any questions, anybody? Gentleman at the back.
You mentioned that the number of visits to GPs is above 300 million, many more times more times than visits to A&E or to hospitals. Now, okay, it's not intensive care, but many, many blood tests are done in GP surgeries. I'm not going to hazard a guess at how many per day, but many. Then 3 days later, if you're lucky, you get the result of that test coming back from wherever it's tested. What about focusing on GP surgery testing?
Well, as we said, it's going to take a bit of time, because our current device is only approved for use in critical care. So we cannot take the device in its current form and sell that to GPs because it requires an arterial line, and arterial lines are only, let's say, placed on a patient in that setting. So if we wanted to go into that route, we'd have to develop a product based on the technology we have, but it has to be a slightly different product to what we have. And that's going to take a bit of time to actually enter that market. That's why for us it's not a near-term strategy, it's a long-term strategy where we think we have the technology, we have the capability, but I think, we first want to get enough revenues on our Proxima 4 in the critical care setting and then enter into that additional space that you are also mentioning.
Three people here, so we'll go, gentleman here.
Two questions. One, what patents are in place on your Proxima product? And the second question is, what percentage of private hospitals to the sort of health service are interested in this?
Okay. Patents, we have just over 20 patent families which are approved or in approval phases worldwide. So we have very strong protection in terms of our IP, but beyond patents we also have a number of trade secrets that sort of really protect our IP in a proper way. So we feel very confident that it won't be easy to copy this product. And in fact, there are no competitive products on the market. I've just returned from a latest conference in Brussels, the biggest one in the world, where these kind of products are being sort of shown. We are still very unique and we attract a lot of attention at the moment. In terms of private and public hospitals, it really depends on the type of patients, because not all patients are sick enough for Proxima in its current form to be used on. And what we find is that, at least here in the UK, the private hospitals do not treat those patients. They try and fend them off to the public hospitals. So from that perspective here in the UK, it's almost 100% public hospitals that we're looking at. The picture is slightly different in Germany in that they also would have those patients, and there we are also talking to sort of, but there the ratio would be more like, sort of maybe 2/3, 1/3 in terms of public and private.
Next question, the gentleman behind.
Thank you. Do you have an estimated launch date for the upgraded P4 Plus product with lactate?
We don't give guidance on that one yet, because that also depends not only on our development progress, but also of a notified body giving us the CE mark, and that has become a very difficult thing to predict in current markets. Unfortunately, we're not the only company who's struggling with that, but that's essentially where we are.
Your slide on is this on? Yeah. Your slide on usage put some annual revenue figures up. That suggested to me that there is some sort of usage fee for the monitors. Is that right?
What we normally would do, most hospitals do not intend to buy the monitor, but want to sort of lease or rent the monitor through some usage agreement. Yeah. What we then do is the CFO has calculated a sort of a scheme on what an additional, let's say, marker per patient would be if you don't buy the monitor. So the actual ASP then really depends on what kind of agreement you have and what annual volume of patients you would have.
Okay, so but you have to negotiate with either the country, the NHS, I suppose, who pays that usage fee, or the hospital.
It's the hospital who pays the usage fee.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Next question, anybody? At the very back, Chris.
When the patient started giving the blood through the machine, how long will that go on for him? Is it a week or 2 weeks?
No, the product is approved for 3 days usage. Now, most patients stay in an ICU for 2 to maximum 3 days. So it's sort of geared towards, when a patient then leaves the intensive care station, the stuff is typically taken off. So we can cover, let's say, the entire period a patient is likely to stay in the intensive care or the operating theatre if that precedes. Like if you have open heart surgery, you start off in the operating theatre, you move on to your intensive care station. We can cover that entire episode of care.
So you use the same machine?
Yes.
For 3 days?
Once connected, you can use it up to 72 hours, yes.
And then what do you do with it?
Well, then it gets disposed of because it's a disposable device. And then typically the patient no longer needs that because then we enter sort of where they don't have arterial lines anymore. If you have a patient who is so sick they're going to have to stay in there for weeks, you could fit another one. Up to 28 days you can sort of fit subsequent of these devices onto a single patient. But I mean, those kind of patients who are that sick who are going to be there for, let's say, weeks on end, there are not too many of them around.
What was the price of the shares last year, and what are the price of the shares today?
I think the current share price, we are sort of just above between 5 and 6p. The price has come down. Essentially, what we have seen is that we think that some shareholders have gotten out. I know we have received the question that, and we are to our extent, I think Royal London has gotten out of the share price. So that's created a bit of a downward pressure right now on the share price. But
What was the launch price?
Oh, I wouldn't know. I wasn't around at the time, so I would have to, instead of guessing, maybe you can sort of look that up and discuss it afterwards.
Thank
Gentleman
you.
over here.
The question I have is that I want to find out, in terms of how competitive your product is in the marketplace, compared to your competitors, where do you stand in the league table?
I'm trying to understand what exactly you're asking in terms
Basically,
of
what was your product? How is it competitive in terms of your competitors?
If you use it on those patients where you do need to do frequent testing, it is more competitive than the competitors.
So in terms of value for money for hospitals and other users, what's the value that you can bring on board?
I mean, for instance, we do sort of rough calculation estimations. If you're going to start measuring every 3 hours or every 2 hours, then actually using Proxima becomes cheaper for the hospital than the existing standard of care. So they can start saving actually money. It's irrespective of potential benefits of, of better patient management. So from a pure economic perspective, once you get into that area of every 2 to 3 hours, that's where Proxima, the health economics, actually work in our favor.
How does it work in relation to the pricing of your product to the hospitals? How does that operate in terms of how expensive is it for hospitals to have your product compared to your competitors?
But that's what I was saying. We have a flat fee for over those 3 days. And if you do, let's say, those on average, the tests every 3 or 2 hours, then using Proxima on your patients is cheaper than using it the conventional way, because there you get charged per test.
Next question, anybody got a question at all? I've got one or two.
Okay.
You touched in your presentation that you might need to go out and fundraise to continue the sales expansion. Will that fundraise also include some of the other elements you talked about, expansion into new areas of markets, or is it purely for the development of this?
I think right now we are focusing on the short-term,
Yeah.
let's say, activities, and whereas the long-term strategy is something that, let's say, we have clear vision of what we want to do, but not in terms of the next step.
And are you a medical company or are you a technology company? Where would you say you're medical?
We're a medical
are you actually more
device company.
technology?
Yeah. We are right clearly a medical device company. We have a great sensing technology, but in the end, it's not the sensor, it's the medical device which gets used. And therefore, we have to have that device and commercialize that. That's where our success already comes from.
Thank you. Two questions here.
What's the position on approval by the FDA?
The US approval, the last time we spoke to the FDA, we were told it would be a drug-device combination, which would require what's so-called a PMA. That takes several years and a lot of money. So we think that through some of our product evolution ideas that we have, we can maybe create a version which is then capable of getting a 510K, which is much cheaper in terms of approvals and also is faster to market. So for now, we will focus for the next 1 to 2 years, we will focus on Europe, while at the same time, once the product evolution allows us to go for 510K approval, that's when we will go to the US.
Thanks. Following on from Mike's question, from the 4 product to the 4 Plus, is that in hardware or software?
Both. On the one hand, it's the software which is on the monitor, but the more important thing is you need to add chemistry onto that sensor. And by adding that chemistry, that becomes then a different piece. A sensor which can measure lactate is physically different to a sensor which cannot measure lactate. So that's where, if I want to call it hardware per se, right? It's actually chemistry.
And that's your bespoke hardware?
Yes.
Thank you very much indeed.
Okay,
Thank you for the questions, everybody.